Well, the Midwest, we see a 5% growth in rents, and that's market rents, and that's because it's affordable. So what's happening right now is that the markets that we saw the biggest run-ups in the South, Florida, Texas, are now not affordable anymore.
Welcome to The Ripple Effect, the podcast that takes you on a journey through the minds of Wharton faculty. I'm your host, Dan Loney, and in each episode, we'll be diving deep into the inspiration behind the groundbreaking research that Wharton professors have conducted and exploring how their findings resonate with the world today.
Well, how much is the housing sector impacting the higher levels of inflation that we're seeing in the economy right now? Pleasure to be joined here in studio by Susan Wachter, professor of real estate here at the Wharton School. Great to see you again. How are you?
Good to be here. Thank you.
That, I guess, is one of the bigger questions right now in terms of the economy, is just how much housing is actually playing into this. How much do you think there is a component of housing into the level of inflation?
Housing right now is a major contributor, but it isn't the only contributor. So we can't depend on housing and rent prices taking us out of this inflation surge.
Is the expectation that lower pricing would see some sort of relief?
Absolutely. Yes, because rent is 40% of the CPI, and it particularly affects owner-occupied housing as part of the CPI index. And it has been a significant part of the CPI increase, but recently it's actually outside of the housing sector that we see a reacceleration of inflation. So even with a decline in rents, and we do see a decline in rents. In fact, in most markets, rents are flat to declining, with the exception of the Midwest. We can come back to that. So there is some relief to come in the CPI and the PCE, less so PCE because CPI has more housing in it, some relief to come. But that will not take us down to the 2% desired inflation, because we actually see the super core CPI increasing in the last 3 months at a rate north of 7%, and that's leaving housing out.
You mentioned about the lowering costs in certain parts of the country, but the Midwest, not so much. Why so is the Midwest not maybe seeing as much?
Well, the Midwest, we see a 5% growth in rents, and that's market rents, and that's because it's affordable. So what's happening right now is that the markets that we saw the biggest run-ups in the South, Florida, Texas, are now not affordable anymore. And we're seeing declines in those markets. There's also a surge in supply in those markets, in part response to the increase in demand, which drove prices up. And that surge in supply is also holding rents down. So we will see some relief in the South, but as we can see, the Midwest not. And overall prices are rising at a significant rate, which feeds into inflation, which feeds into interest rates, which feeds into mortgage rates.
Right.
And in this conundrum that the Fed is struggling with right now, the higher the mortgage rates, the more likely that supply in housing will be constrained as homeowners are locked in. They're not giving up their 3% mortgages for a 7% mortgage, which the Fed's interest rate translates into.
Is the expectation, though, that the types of rates we saw a couple of years ago when we did see that run on refinancing where mortgage rates were down to 3.25%, I think the expectation is that's not coming back, and it's trying to find that sweet spot right now, whatever that number is in terms of mortgage rates, that will actually start the normal type of activity that we've seen in the past.
We're not going to see 3%. That's those and 0%, near 0% real for the Treasury. That's in our past.
Right.
What we're hoping for is, as inflation comes under control, we can get closer to the historical average of mortgage rates, which is 5%.
Right.
Even at 5%, we'll see people holding on to that 3% mortgage. So ultimately, what's keeping rents up is, despite the decline in demand, is lack of supply, coming from two sources. Lack of supply from inventory. People are locked into their homes because of low mortgage rates. And also it's costly to produce new supply, so construction is costly. And interestingly enough, we also have another headwind, which is that the rental supply, which increased, is now decreasing. There's a glut in the market, which is why we're seeing rents decrease in some markets. There's a glut in the market, and that should help inflation.
Right.
That should get inflation under control for a time, because that glut will be absorbed. And once that's absorbed, then we will see housing prices rise again, rents rise again. So there's kind of a window for the Fed action to get us closer to normal mortgage rates and interest rates and bring us back to normalcy. And that's to about the end of 2025 when we'll start seeing rents rise again, because this glut will be absorbed.
Yeah, it's interesting you talk about the Midwest. One of the components that I watch is Case-Shiller with the 20-city index. And the most recent numbers, again, showing San Diego has been one of those cities that seemingly has seen a lot of year-over-year increase. Chicago and Detroit were two of the cities noted as seeing the highest year-over-year increase, which I don't remember seeing those two particular cities in this mix at that high a level. So it's not just the rental price, it seems like, but it's also the housing prices in that region as well.
It's a search for affordability, a search for affordability with a job market. And Chicago qualifies. It's affordable. Midwest is affordable. The South, which has historically been South and West, Southwest, historical and with job growth, it's less affordable.
So will we see another bump up of housing prices then probably before we see things slow down? I mean, we saw such a rush in 2021 and 2022 where prices went up, and then things seemed to like level off a little bit. It feels like maybe we're getting ready for another bump up.
It all depends on the overall economy. We see in the most recent numbers the overall economy is slowing. And also it depends on affordability. We now are at affordability constraints for many households. So they can't afford the housing, so they can't demand the housing. I think that the consensus for this coming year is that housing prices will increase, but perhaps at about the inflation rate, assuming that GNP is declining in growth rate, as we've seen in the most recent quarter. If we don't see that deceleration in the GNP growth rate, it will absolutely heat up the housing market. And despite the high mortgage rates, because with employment, there is a need to move to new housing. Maybe it's in the Midwest. And there is still millennials are at we still have peak millennials. They're still looking to come out of their family's home. You know, we have 50% of young adults. It's back at record Great Depression levels in recent research that we did. 50% of young adults are living at home, and they and their parents are looking for them to go out independently, which will increase the demand, put more pressure. We have a supply shortage. We have pent-up demand.
From a policy perspective, do you have to start to look at some of these issues, and maybe it's affordability, maybe it's supply, where policy may be able to help the process out along here?
Yes, I think there is a new look at the importance of policy, particularly at state levels. States across the country are experimenting with ways to ease up the supply of developable land.
And to be able to do that, then they have to work directly with the builders and the local communities to be able to kind of open some of these doors, right?
That's the way forward.
What's the expectation then that you have for the problems that we're having right now with the housing market, and what we need to kind of think in terms of a plan moving forward over the next couple of years to be able to bring the housing market back into alignment?
Well, first, this really is mortgage rates, and mortgage rates aren't going to come down until inflation and the overall interest rate comes down. Because otherwise, rental is more affordable, but rental isn't that affordable either. In most markets, rental is more affordable, but still not that affordable. And in fact, we see it in the percentage of young adults, millennials, who are renting versus owning. If you look at the individual quote-unquote home ownership or individual as opposed to the overall, we see 1/3 of young adults living not living in owner-occupied, either living with their parents or living at renting, which is significantly lower than previous generations. So what's the answer? The answer is, first and foremost, getting the mortgage rate down so that people can become owners. And that is going to ease up the pressure on the rental market as well. That's one of the contributors to high rents, is those who are priced out of the owner occupancy market and only can be in the rental market. And the second is a longer run societal issue, which is increasing the supply, the potential to supply housing, whether it's rental or owner occupied, especially starter homes.
One of the things that I guess has kind of been priced out of the housing market are those homes, newer homes, in kind of that $200,000 to $300,000 category. It seems like every time you see a development going up of new homes, you're talking about $400,000, $500,000, which obviously is a challenge for a lot of people, and it sure is going to be a challenge, as you said, with younger generations who, in many cases, are living as still at home at this point.
Yeah, it's very difficult to have $80,000. I mean, there have been trillions of dollars of wealth created for those who already own their home.
Right.
But for those who are looking to buy or rent, coming up with tens of thousands of dollars is no easy task. So yes, starter homes. Builders are in fact moving in this direction. Homes are getting smaller, but it's less profitable to produce on the starter home than the luxury market overall. And there needs to be that ability to increase the supply of land that is developable near infrastructure, near jobs, in communities that are, and in states that are willing to go in this direction.
And then you're also seeing, from the fact that we have such higher interest rates right now, I think the expectation is even if they do come down, they're going to come down marginally, not anything significant. So if you're out there buying a home, don't you almost have to kind of ride the wave a little bit of thinking about maybe going in with a mortgage at like maybe 6.75%, and then if it does go down to like 6.25%, then start to think about the refi and kind of riding this wave of a different kind of wave of refis than we had a couple of years ago.
Well, that's the hope for those who are buying with mortgages today, is that refi is in their future at a 6% down from 7%. That helps out a lot. But the major buyers today are buying, many without a mortgage, because again, 7% is daunting.
And the expectation of what you're buying, to a degree, has changed in terms of the process of going through it. In many cases, you're talking about no inspections that are required to buy a house. The dynamic of what you would normally do to buy a house has certainly changed, it seems like.
Yes, and the relief, unfortunately, would come with the slowing of the economy.
Right.
And the slowing of the economy is a double-edged sword. On the one hand, rents will ease up, owner-occupied housing prices will ease up, but incomes then will decline as well. So that isn't a good solution for affordability.
It also seems like that the push to build multifamily properties, which has been so strong in the last decade or so, that seems like that's continuing. That's where builders believe their bread and butter is going to be, at least for the foreseeable future.
And there's the need, again, peak millennials. But the glut in the market right now is going to slow supply for the next year or so.
Great to see you again, Susan. Thanks very much.
Pleasure.
Susan Wachter, professor of real estate here at the Wharton School.
Thank you for listening to The Ripple Effect. We hope you found this episode informative and engaging. Don't forget to subscribe and leave us a review so that we can continue to bring you the best insight from the Wharton School.